Welcome to Console Room 2024 and our comics panel. Please welcome to the stage Dave Wheeler and Christopher Jones.
Oh, hi.
Hello again.
And online, Jody Hauser.
Hi, Jody.
Hi, Jody.
Hello.
I feel weird because I'm waving at a monitor.
Yeah, in the last 60 seconds, I was nominated to moderate this, which I think just means I'm going to make sure we all get introduced, because I don't have a plan for what's about to happen.
You have a plan?
No, not really.
Fair. Let's go.
So let's make sure we first start by saying who we all are. I'll go last, so you go first. And then...
God. My name is Dave Wheeler. I'm a kid-friendly, all-ages comic artist. I also work in the professional wrestling industry as a gear and merch designer, also a professional toy designer and YouTuber. So a man with many hats.
Okay. Jody, tell the good people who you are.
I'm Jody Hauser. I am a comics writer, probably in the circle best known for writing Doctor Who, starting with the 13th Doctor. I've also worked on Star Wars, Critical Role, Stranger Things, superhero stuff. I write a lot of comics, and I really like Dave's hat.
Oh, thank you.
You are a man of many hats, and that's a very good one.
This is my favorite.
My name is Chris, and I also like Dave's hat.
Aw.
I draw Doctor Who and other comics. I think you all know that by now. Let's move on.
Come on. You need your roses.
I have drawn miniseries featuring the 3rd Doctor, the 7th Doctor, and a graphic novel featuring the 10th Doctor. I have done many other comics as well. I currently live in Los Angeles working for Warner Brothers Animation. I'm from here originally. I love this con. Let's move forward.
I see
We're talking about comics. I don't think we have a great plan here. We are all comics professionals. I'll start with this. Jody, you mentioned that you're known for having done 13th Doctor comics. I very clearly remember when you were given the interesting task of writing the first comic book appearance at Titan Comics of the 13th Doctor when we knew diddly squat about the 13th Doctor. What was that experience like?
Well, that was interesting because they did give us maybe 10 script pages total as reference that were just snippets of scenes. So it's like, oh, you could see each of the, fam talking, and you could see 13 talking a little bit. And like, this was before I think even the longer trailer had come out. So we were kind of working just with like snippets of characters. So I've had people ask me like, how come Graham didn't call the Doctor Doc early on? It was like, I literally didn't know he was going to do that. And we luckily that first episode dropped while we were in the lettering stage for the comic. So we were able to go and tweak the dialogue to fit the characters a little bit better, and, knowing how everyone was connected to each other and what those relationships were like, we could sort of tweak along those lines. But the first draft, we knew like teeny tiny bit.
Because we've both worked on a lot of comics based on licensed property, and it really varies, in my experience, varies a lot from project to project how much reference you're provided with. Sometimes it's ample, and other times you're just scrounging to inform your work with what you can find on the internet.
I was going to say, from what I'm hearing, you defined the 13th Doctor.
Yes. It's all you.
Yeah.
A little bit of
no,
Jody.
no, not really, but... I feel like we sort of got to do our own version, especially of the companions, because that sort of dynamic we built up in that first issue sort of continued through everything we did, I feel like. So, and I don't think it was really that different from the show, but I think it had its tone that was sort of specific to those comic stories.
How did you get the Doctor Who gig originally? How did that come to you?
Oh, well, years and years ago, the first licensed comic I did, and actually the first comic series I did, was for a show called Orphan Black. And that first issue was in Loot Crate. So it is still the best-selling comic issue I've ever written because it was in Loot Crate. So that sort of put me on the map for writing licensed books in general. And at that point, I think Titan had just gotten the Doctor Who license, and some Titan editors came up to me at a convention and asked if I had any interest in writing Doctor Who. And I almost lost my mind. And I was like so nervous. I was like, they gave me their cards, and I'm like, but they have my cards. So if they really want me, they'll email me. I feel like it's presumptuous to email them, even though they gave me their cards. So I didn't email them, and I didn't hear back. And I was like, yeah. And then years later, when I'd done a lot more comic work and was much more confident in my ability to tackle like big properties that I have a deep love for, it came up when after the 13th Doctor had been announced, and I was again asked if I was interested in writing Doctor Who. And at that point I was like, yes, I'll take the job. Yeah. And there was no, I've gotten over my imposter syndrome just enough to accept work like
What's that
basically.
like?
I mean,
I haven't gotten over it. I'm sorry.
The inward is still there, but the outward, it's like I can pretend to be a little more confident, I guess.
You can fake your way through it like some of us.
One of us. One of us. I was going to say, you played hard to get with Doctor Who. That's amazing.
I have to say, I jumped at my first chance to do anything with Doctor Who. Yes, please.
I got to draw a coloring book page. Someday. I will.
Well, one thing about your comic book experience, which is very different from mine, is your relationship with comics and putting projects together and finding your own place in projects is informed by, I think you have a lot more knowledge and understanding of the consumer side of it, because you've worked in comic book stores a lot.
Oh yeah,
and that's not something I've ever dealt with. Does that when you're thinking about how to pitch something, market something, what kind of project would do well? Does that experience?
I mean, definitely. It was also something that impacted me on design, like designing books and stuff like that too. I was lucky enough to work at Archaea for a bit, and I was one of the quote unquote interns, but I ended up laying out 3 books for them and like laying out back matter and all that stuff. So that combined with seeing what sold in the store. Which quick shout out to Hot Comics and Collectibles locally. I work with them. I do their social media and stuff now. But working there for freaking ever, seeing connecting covers being a thing. So my trade paperbacks have connecting covers. Seeing die cuts, seeing chromium covers come through that just sat. I'm like, oh, thank God, those things are expensive to make. But I don't know. It created a really weird and kind of fun perspective on things. I've been lucky enough to actually bring Chris in several times for signings over the years too, and I mean, we've been friends for a decade, but it was one of those things of bringing you in and seeing your enthusiasm for it was also something that helped inform me of. I mean, I'm a spastic person as I see some regulars and friends out in the audience that know me too well, but it was one of those things of really emphasizing the point that you can make anything what you want of it. You can come in, and if 2 people stop by, you can still be just as excited and just as happy to see those 2 people as you are to see 100. And that was sad to say. That was what happened with Chris, I think, the first signing, because we forgot to advertise, and Chris had like 5 people.
I'm the weird guy at the table in the corner of the comic shop, like waving at people as they come in for comics that day. That's kind of the dynamic that was there.
Well, I think we put you in front of the new wall too, so I was like, you were kind of in the way of everybody. I'm like, what am I doing? Oh God! But it got better.
It got better. One of the things that is part of the experience of working in comics is doing conventions and signings and promoting your own work. And it's something I didn't understand when I was starting out, that it's not just about the skill set to create the work, whether you're a writer or an artist. Mm-hmm. It is promoting yourself and marketing yourself and talking to fans, and it's the whole package that is kind of the skill set that you have to develop. And you talking about people coming up. I learned really early on that you're going to tell the same anecdotes a lot. You're going to answer some of the same questions over and over a lot, and you have to do it with a certain freshness and enthusiasm every time. You can't roll your eyes about it, because the person who is the 47th person to ask you that question, it's not their fault that 46 other people got to ask it first. They deserve every bit as good an answer as the first person got, or maybe the fifth person when you got better at answering it.
Well, and one of the things too is again, I've been lucky enough to know you a very long time, Jody. I actually met you what feels like a million years ago at this point. But the thing that stood out is I know a lot of comic writers, and I know a lot of them very well. And it was one of those things of, you were the first comic writer I ever met that didn't, like, the first thing wasn't, well, I'm just the writer. Like, you were such a wonderful, like, person behind the table, and it was just like, this is awesome. Like, she kicks ass. Oh, I don't know if I can say that. That's my bad.
I think I have the benefit of, I'm the rare creative who's also an extrovert, so I actually like talking to people. But like, even I get tired. Like, I know this is like the fourth day of a convention for you guys, and like Sundays are just hard when people like are really excited to meet you, and it's maybe their only day at the show. It's like Chris was saying, you still have to have that energy there, and it's like you're drawing from the deep reserves that you usually don't need to tap.
Caffeine's a wonderful thing.
And as much as our jobs, and I certainly feel like my level of celebrity is not on the same level as like the actors you'll see at a convention or something like that, one thing that's part of the sameness of the experience of doing shows like this, that seeing this side of it has made me very conscious of when I meet celebrities is, you're meeting them, and you may be meeting them at their best, but they might have also just had a nightmare getting their stuff through the airport and didn't sleep well in their hotel room, and you have no idea what is going on in their life when you get that maybe like 1 minute of interaction with them. Yeah. And it's great if they can put on game face and be great. But I've talked to people and had not a great experience with them, and then found out that was absolutely an anomaly. That is not who they normally are at all. But it makes me very aware when I'm the one behind the table talking to fans. It's like, oh man, I got to bring it. I can't do that to somebody.
First impressions are very, very important. I did a Doctor Who collectibles panel yesterday, and I am so sorry for the people who came in there. I had no idea what I was doing, so I was kind of going off the cuff, and I'm a very high energy person as is, so it kind of became a weird improv exercise of talking about toys and collectibles, and I'm like, man, I really hope I didn't scare anybody away.
Isn't that really what a panel is, though? Panels are just kind of weird improv exercises.
So somewhere along the way I missed an email, so I didn't know I had the panel yesterday until these two lovely people in the audience informed me, and I was like, oh, whoa. So I didn't have anything with me. I made now I'm not on the John Davey level of making PowerPoints, but I did put together a presentation. That dude's really good at that, by the way. It's amazing. I felt very unprepared, but yeah.
I didn't get to see his. I put one together this weekend, but his was probably cooler than mine.
It had videos.
His was definitely cooler than mine.
He punched through a wall.
I have a question for you, Jody. So you've written a lot of different kinds of comics, some licensed things, and all manner of stuff. You could rattle off a list much better than I could, but sometimes I'm sure you write a script knowing who is going to be drawing it. Sometimes you don't. How much does having or not having that information influence any choices you might make doing the writing?
I mean, I think if it's an artist I've worked with, it's like I worked with Roberta for so long on Doctor Who. I knew that she enjoyed, coming up with new character, like alien designs. So I tried to put things like that. So if it's something where I've worked with the artist and I know things that they like to draw, I'll try to find a way to put that in. But my script style is kind of sparse enough that I don't really cater the scripting style so much to different artists. And a lot of the artists I've worked with have just told me they really like the sort of amount of detail I put in. It's like it's enough that they sort of know what's going on or what's important to the story, but I try to find that balance where it's like they have the information they need, but people don't feel like they're boxed in. They still feel like they are part of the storytelling team rather than like, a writer going, you art monkey, draw this. Because I never want to be that type of writer. But yeah, I feel like I've sort of over the years come up with a good balance in terms of how much detail is in the script. And that seems to work for most of the artists I've worked with. So I just kind of stick to that if it ain't broke.
Do you think visually at all about things like camera angles or how many panels, or how the panels are structured on a page? Or are you just thinking in terms of plot and dialogue and letting the artist figure it all out?
So I tend not to dictate too much. If there is, it's like obviously I'll signify if it's a splash page, and then if it's a page where one panel is bigger, I'll tag it as semi-splash, which I don't know if anyone else uses that term. It's just something I came up with. But generally, it's like I will have a picture in my head of how the page could look, but I tend to not dictate that to the artist, because almost every time the artist comes up with a better version. If there's something that's so specific to the story that it needs to be laid out a specific way, or there needs to be a specific flow of like the visual information for the reader, it's like I'll try to include that. But again, it's like I feel like most of the time in terms of like layouts and stuff, it's like this is what the artist knows. Like this is what they've been trained for. They're going to be better at it than I am. So I try to be a little more hands off there if I can.
I was going to put it out there. I've been lucky enough to work with you on a very strange side of things, because I was an editor at a very small local company that does not make comics anymore. But being on the editorial side of things, and at the start, I was going to get the chance to actually be Chris's editor, and that was quickly taken away by the owner, who was also the writer. But I was still included on all emails, so it was one of those things of like you were just saying. Chris is, an artist knows what they're doing and what they're capable of, and it was one of those things of I felt like they were micromanaging you to death on that one.
A little bit.
Understatement of the decade. But it was one of those things of I just always wanted to drop a line in there of just like, just trust Chris. He knows what he's doing. And I didn't want to get fired, so I didn't do that. That came a couple months later.
With your work, I mean, you've written and drawn stuff. You've done a lot of back end things in terms of inking, coloring, production type stuff. Does wearing those different hats affect your thinking and what you're planning for when you're doing the more front end parts? Yeah,
when I'm writing, thankfully. Much like Jody, I've been lucky enough to work with one of my best buds, as an artist for a very long time. So it was one of those things of we kind of could finish each other's sentences when it came to that. But when I wasn't working with them, I kind of would go, okay, I hate doing this as a colorist, or I hate doing this as an inker. So maybe I'll avoid doing that in some scripts. Same thing with doing other collaborations of where I'm a colorist, and they'll go, oh, do you want to work with this person? One of the books I worked on was the Telos tribute to Michael Ringo, which was a lot of people donating a lot of time to make some amazing stories. And they were kind of pulling me into like multiple ones, and they're like, do you think you can color this artist? I'm like, mm-mm. Like there was two of those where I'm like, oh, no. There are like 27 crowd scenes in 3 pages. Like, I'm doomed. But, other ones I had worked with artists before, so it was, pretty easy to jump in and like go to town on them.
But
with the colors.
Having had history coloring other people's work,
yeah,
does that make you think differently when you're doing your own line art, thinking about, how much do I make specific choices about lighting and shading and things like that in the line art that kind of locks in, like, well, then it has to be colored this way versus, here's just line art of kind of the shapes, and you can do whatever you want with it.
Well, a lot of the time, especially with scripts and stuff, I'll say stuff like a dimly lit room, and or a very bright room. I usually include like the general lighting situation, so it's not like, oh, you're in a cave, or it's like no, you're on a stage, and you're lit by incredibly bright lights, type thing. Sorry, it's like, oh, I must go towards them. But it's one. Sorry, it's one of those weird things of. Having worked in different realms, that was a really long way of saying yes. Sorry, it's my bad. This is why I write or I draw.
It's all good.
All right,
it's all good. Like I said, we had not like rigidly planned a panel presentation here, so we can keep asking each other questions. If anybody out there, as we go, has questions, please put a hand up, and we will call on you and include your question in the conversation.
I was going to say, since we are also on the YouTubes,
Yes.
we do have a microphone dead center of the room, too. If you do have a question, just come on up and ask, too, because then everybody can hear it.
That's an excellent point.
That
He has
helps.
an excellent point.
Otherwise, everybody...
Yeah,
So
and
it's
I
a little
think
hard.
we have someone moving to that microphone now.
Hello, Jody. I've been dying to ask you questions for a while because I do a podcast about Doctor Who comics.
There's a monitor there?
One of the ones I wanted to ask you is, you were the 13th Doctor writer for Titan, and towards the end of their 13th Doctor run, they did a pairing with the 13th Doctor and the 10th Doctor, which was really, really good, the Tale of Two Time Lords. And then the story that went after that was another 13th Doctor and 10th Doctor story that kind of fed into one into the other, where the Sea Devil started taking over. And my question was, how did those stories come into being? Well, I guess how the first story came into being, pairing up the 13th and the 10th Doctor, was that your idea? Was it Titan going to you and wanting to do that? And then why was there a follow-up that had the same pairing going on?
Well, I think I remember the crossover came from Titans, and I think some of the specifics of the second story, also the fact that it was the Sea Devils and that it tied into the Tesla episode, those came from Titan. I think for the first one, I think I was the one that pitched that it happened when Ten and Martha had been blinked away by the Weeping Angels, because I wanted to sort of tie into what happened that we didn't get to see on screen. But there were a couple times, especially like that second one, like I was saying, it was like, well, we haven't seen Sea Devils in a while, so we'd love to have them show up at the comics, and we want to tie it into the Tesla episode. Here are some ingredients, make a stew. And I find those really fun stories to do, because it is a little bit of a challenge when you have a number of elements that seem like they might not necessarily fit together. And the thing I liked about that story was at the end, I realized there was a leftover Rose Tyler, which, because of the way I had set up the specifics of the paradox, and that ended up feeding into the next crossover that we did with 8 and 11, because I wanted to tell the story of that extra Rose Tyler left over to be a revolutionary for worlds where she was needed. So, it was a mix of both. Some of it came from me, some of it came from Titan, and then some of what we came up with then fed into later stories.
I know one of the things I love about drawing comics is I find myself presented with challenges by a script that I have to solve drawing problems that never would occur to me to play with if I was just sitting around going, what do I feel like drawing today? I would think as a writer, getting prompts like that, it's like you have to use all these elements, kind of has that same vibe as far as like, well, it never would have occurred to me to try to combine all these in a story, but that's what they're asking me to do, so.
We have another question.
Yeah, exactly.
As writers and artists, how much of a challenge is it for you to be writing stories about a property that's been in existence for 60 years? And how much, as a follow-up question, how much do you hope that your stories will end up on the television screen?
Well, you're the one that's written Doctor Who. You tackle that first.
I honestly, in terms of, because I've written a lot of different licensed properties and some are newer than others, and really the longer a property has been around, that just means there's more reference material to go back into. So, there's so many iterations of the Doctor you can go back and look at if you're doing a crossover and you need to reference voice. It's like there's so many hours you can go back and watch if you want to. And there, of course, is the issue, especially for a time traveler, where you want to make sure you're not tiptoeing into areas where other stories have gone. And that's where it's really helpful to have editorial who's more familiar with the property in some iterations than you might be. But really, honestly, the more reference you have, the better. In terms of appearing on screen, I think we just had our very first comic story that appeared in Doctor Who. So I don't know if that's going to be setting a precedent, but it was very, very cool to see. So, yeah.
I've only colored on things
Yeah,
that have had
yeah.
that long a legacy, but I suppose I did some educational graphic novels, and getting to work on stuff like the moon landing and the first ascent of Everest and stuff was interesting because we were able to put some faces and whatnot to just what would normally be kind of a footnote in a book, which was kind of neat, but that was about the extent of it.
Yeah, I mean, as a big Doctor Who fan, I've certainly gotten a kick out of drawing the Doctor Who stories I've drawn. With the recent graphic novel I did with Dan Slott, the new monsters that we had in that, the pyromeths, I am so happy with how their design came out. I would love to see them in live action. I don't know that that's ever likely to happen. But anytime I've gotten to work on an existing property, superhero stuff I've been lucky enough to do, there is a real, it's not just fun, there's like a deep satisfaction that comes from working on something connected to anything you loved as a child that you feel like you're getting to give back to it. Somehow there's a sense of like the completion of a cycle. It's always hard to wrap my brain around the idea. It's like comics I create feel like my comics. They don't feel as real to me somehow as comics I went and got in a store when I was a young reader. And knowing that there are readers out there that for them, my stuff is as substantial and makes big impressions on them as much as the stuff I consumed, it's hard to wrap my head around sometimes, but it's definitely one of the fun parts of the job.
What I was going to say, I do a lot more things on the independent comic scene. So like I self-publish through Mindwave Comics, and it's always a surreal thing of feeling really, really old when I see someone come up and go, "Did you know that your comic was my first comic book?" And I go, I thank you. Like, you don't really know what to say, but it's a huge honor because it's that weird thing of creating stories can have such an impact on people. I got a lovely letter from this kid who came by since he was 8 years old at cons, and he wrote it to my buddy Samir and I who run Mindwave, and he said, "Because of you guys, I'm going to school for animation because I want to try and tell stories like you, but I like cartoons better," which was like, okay, a little backhanded compliment, but it worked.
I was at a convention recently. One of the superhero properties I've done a lot of work with is Young Justice, which is only about a dozen years old. It doesn't feel like an old project to me. It feels like a recent history sort of thing.
That's older than that.
Well,
Just
a little bit.
Oh, I suppose for the animated series, though.
Yeah, no,
there we go.
I'm talking about the
I was like,
animated
hold
series
up.
incarnation, not the original Peter David comics. But and it's the animated version that's relevant to the story because this woman came up to my table with a young, maybe 5 or 6 year old girl with her, and they were looking at the Young Justice stuff I had, and the mother said, "Oh, I loved this so much when I was a kid."
Nice.
And I felt the liver spots growing on my hands and arms and the gray coming into my hair.
It's like that scene from Indiana Jones.
Exactly.
Soon you will be dust.
Other questions out there before we start asking each other more questions? Oh,
He's back.
He's back.
Hello.
I tell you, I have plenty of questions.
All right. Fire 'em.
This one is primarily for Jody, but the other two kind of ties in.
Okay.
Jody, two of the spin-off, or not really spin-off characters, but Doctor Who characters that you've done comics for were Missy and the Fugitive Doctor. I was wondering how those came into being and how much of a joy was it for you to write those two different characters? And then for Chris and for Dave, along the same lines, is there a particular Doctor Who character, not necessarily a doctor, but a character from the Doctor Who universe that you would love to do a comic book of, like a 4-issue miniseries?
Hell yeah.
Missy was actually a character. So the very first stories I wrote for Doctor Who were backups in the Road to 13. So I did a story for 10, a story for 11, and a story for 12. And Missy was in the story with 12, and it was just like 4 pages. And I was very much like, I love writing this character. I've always loved writing villains. I don't know if that's a statement on me personally, but it was a blast, and I kept pushing to see if we could bring Missy back in comics. And I kept getting no and no and no. And then finally, the anniversary for the Master's first appearance was coming up, and they did want to do something for the Master there. And so then they, knowing that I really wanted to write Missy, they said, why don't we do a team up of Missy and the Delgado Master? So it's the most recent Master and the first one. And that ended up being a blast. And because it was the team up, I wanted to tie into Missy pretending to be the doctor, like she did very briefly. So it was Missy pretending to be the doctor, teaming up with her younger self and treating him like a spoiled little child, which was way too much fun. And as for the Fugitive Doctor, that was the story that I pitched that I thought for sure I was going to get a no on in terms of the early crimes of the Time Lords. They let me do some really brutal, terrible things in that story because it had to be pretty bad for the Fugitive Doctor to become a fugitive, in my view, because, you know, she was obviously sort of a dedicated soldier for such a long time. Like whatever she saw that made her turn and run had to be just nightmarish. And they let us do some really cool stuff with that. So.
Right on. But I have kind of a strange one, but it would be Wilf. I would love to write like young Wilf up to when Donna's mom was born. I think would be really, really kind of fun to like kind of play up, because he played a soldier, I think, in one of the movies who gets
He was
launched.
a police officer in the second of the Peter Cushing films.
Yeah, so it kind of connect the dots, I think would be really fun.
You mentioning that, like, no, I have a pitch right off the top of my head. The doctor meets a young Wilf during his soldier days, but can't reveal himself as the doctor because it would alter the Wilf's
that'd be
timeline.
awesome.
Okay.
There's so many avenues.
Well, you mentioned the Roger Delgado Master. When I was doing my first Doctor Who comic, the Third Doctor miniseries I did with Paul Cornell, I got to draw so much cool stuff in that series, but the thing that always made me like geek out as I was putting the brush lines down of like, I can't believe what I'm drawing, was literally inking the Roger Delgado's beard and those little white stripes he had at the corners. As far as like things I would want to do that I haven't, I still would love to do the book that Tony Lee and I were all but set up to do at Titan, and then it fell apart for reasons I never quite heard the reason behind. When it was an anniversary year for the Centaurans and Unit.
Potato Men.
And the pitch was a sequel to the Third Doctor episode Inferno, where you find out that world wasn't entirely destroyed. A lot of damage was done, but it wasn't destroyed. The brigade leader survived. The Centaurans invade that Earth, and the Unit is not in a place to stop them. There's no doctor, and they take over. And then they gain the access to the technology to access our reality.
Ruh-roh.
And it becomes a Unit Torchwood crossover. You have Unit and Torchwood each dealing with doppelgangers from the other universe, including Kate Stewart having to deal with the doppelganger of her dead father.
Whoosh.
And it would involve the Centaurans, and I got as far as I did promo art for it, and it was Jack with a BFG flanked by Osgoods.
That's amazing.
I still want to do that book.
Someday.
That's so cool.
Someday.
Well, we'll wait for other questions to emerge. What else do you guys want to talk about? I've asked a bunch of questions.
I don't know. Now I'm trying to think.
Now you're trying to think.
Here you go. So this is something, obviously, all three of us have very different paths in the comic industry and such.
Very, yeah.
But what has been something what has been the thing that you've enjoyed most, and what was the thing that you saw as the biggest challenge?
Two very different questions.
I see a twofer. That's a value.
It's very whether it's Doctor Who or my experience with Young Justice, it's great to have an ongoing association with something that you get engagement with a fandom. Mm-hmm. Because individual stories are fun to draw and work on, but like as an ongoing thing, having that element of of an audience. Because if you're an actor or a singer or something like that, you perform in front of an audience, you get that immediate feedback. Working in comics as a writer or an artist, you're off in solitude in the corner of your room. You're creating art for an audience, but you're not there when the audience experiences it. So whether it's online or at conventions, having that feedback from people that know your work and follow it, and that happens more when it's connected with a specific property or a franchise, whether it's creator-owned or some existing property you've been lucky enough to contribute to. That just adds an extra layer of enjoyment to it for me.
Right on. Jody?
I think for me, this actually ties into something that Chris said earlier, but because I work on so many licensed books, and licensed comics are sort of an easy entry point for anyone who hasn't really read comics before to start reading comics. I've had so many people tell me like this Doctor Who comic or the Stranger Thing comic or so on was the first comic they ever read. And just feeling like I'm helping give people a easy way into a medium that I love so much and that has been such a big part of my life, like, since I was a kid. That really does mean a lot. And I always try to, have recommendations for, not just my own stuff, but it's like, oh, if you really like this story, you should go read Saga or something, which I think I just say to everyone, honestly. But yeah, just feeling like I'm helping people discover comics, I guess, by giving them a story that they already know who the characters are and what the world looks like. So then they can sort of focus on learning to read a new medium, I guess.
Right on.
That's cool.
Biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge? Oh boy. Trying to think. I mean, like the thing that's always hard. I find there's things I find harder about more the lifestyle of doing this career than the actual creative task of doing it. I mean, I know how to draw a comics page. It's the whole thing of. You get a job and you do a job, it runs for a certain amount of time, it reaches a natural conclusion, and you're out of work and looking for work again, and that cycle produces a lot of anxiety and self-doubt, and you find, there's things that you deal with that just are blows to your ego and your sense of you valuing your own work, and that kind of thing is really hard. I find that harder than any part of actually doing the job.
I was going to add to that. Like that's one of my things that I've gotten a chance to work for almost every major comic company, and you'll never see my name in any of them because most of my work is doing fill-in work or doing behind the scenes stuff. And it's one of those funny things that people are just they're like, well, what have you done? You've been doing comics 15, 16, 17 years, and it's like, I mean, I've done a lot of stuff. It's just, didn't get in.
Levels on which you're not your stuff and mine, your experiences and mine are so different. You've worn so many different hats, and I've done some amateur writing, but I've never had, since I've been like a pro, I haven't had anything I've written published. I just haven't put the time in. It's hard enough finding art gigs, let alone branching out into writing gigs. I've penciled stuff that other people have inked. I've penciled and inked my own stuff. I have never inked a page of someone else's pencils in my whole career. Never came up.
You wanna?
It's terrifying at
Worth
this
a
stage.
shot.
But I mean, I'm sure we could get people up here that had similar kind of career paths or experiences in comics, but I think there is a lot of everyone's got such a unique experience with it. And we're kind of three very removed corners of the triangle here.
We're a unique trio up here or around here. I think I'm looking down at the monitor, and I know that you're also on the monitor over there. So I'm like, we're a triangle.
I'm everywhere.
Yeah. It's happening again.
She's so good at writing those villains. Now I know why.
Oh no.
But yeah, I think what you're saying, it's like going into freelance work. You always hear it's like it's feast or famine, and people don't really say it's usually both of those at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like you're sort of you might have deadlines piling up, but you also don't know what you're going to be working on in 3 months. You might have like no income coming in. So it's sort of just schedule chaos, I think, a lot of the time. And for me last year, I had COVID in May for like all of May. Ooh. And when you work in monthly comics and you miss like a full month of work, I spent pretty much the rest of the year just catching up. It's just like dominoes. It's like one thing's late. So, but then you got to finish it up, but then the next thing's late. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
That's why I do self-publishing.
We have another question from a familiar voice.
Hello once again. One of the things that all three of you have in common, Dave, I'm not super familiar with your work, but you mentioned that you work licensing stuff with WWE packaging and stuff.
I design gear and merch, so for just about everything.
But all of that has, in creating comics, licensed comics, you have to deal with like the BBC or the owners of the properties to get the yay or nay on things. And I was wondering how challenging or how easy is it to work with like the BBC to get final approval on a storyline for a Doctor Who comic, like a 13th Doctor comic, or like with the WWE approving packaging for or merchandise and something along those lines.
I will say the nice thing about being on the writing side, and I think often the art side too, is the editor is the one who is talking to the licensor. So everything goes to the editor, and the editor, if there's like weird stuff going on, the editor will do their best to like shield you from it and make sure it isn't impacting your work. And I think the hardest thing for us is there were a couple times when like TV scripts had come in after we had started a comic and we had to go back and change stuff because it ended up being too similar to an upcoming episode that we didn't actually know that was going to be the case when it started. So yeah, usually it's just timing stuff like that that ends up being the trickiest.
Yeah, I think the creative team usually aren't the ones having to deal with that. You learn fairly quickly early on that that's part of the game, is you're going to get these arbitrary limitations or decisions or requests for changes handed down from on high. The biggest thing that's frustrating about them is you almost never get any reasoning behind it. There's no asking of why. It's just, it's this, do it. Like, okay.
And I mean, that, like the stuff that I do, so thankfully within the wrestling industry, I work with a lot of individuals more, so working with independent contractors. But one of my jobs is I work with Boss Fight Studios on their Legends of Lucha Libre line. So I work with very, very specific limitations of gear, tattoos, everything like that. Like having to draw someone's, like for instance, one coming up is an action figure of the wrestler Vampiro. He has a tattoo that goes from his pec all the way over to his back and all the way down his arm. And I had to figure out how to draw that flat for what's called a tampo hit. Also, it had to then go back and get approved because he had to go, yep. So it was a very strange thing because, again, I can only imagine with larger properties and stuff like that, it's that much more intimidating. But it is a very strange thing to draw something that is on a person and then have to go, is this right? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with my experience, whether it be Doctor Who or some of the superhero stuff, it mostly comes in the form of characters you can't use or proposed storylines that get vetoed, often because, that's similar to something else that we're doing that no one knows about yet. But there's also been things like we were doing a storyline in the Young Justice comic that featured a couple of the milestone characters, Icon and Rocket. And in the middle of a story arc, there was some issue. It ended up getting resolved and it was all fine, but there was an issue briefly where there was something up between DC and the milestone characters, which they don't own outright. They just license the use of. That, like I said, it got resolved, but we were basically told, for the time being, until you're otherwise, you can't use them anymore. So they just vanished mid-story.
They were called away on a mission.
Because there was no way to resolve their involvement without at least referencing them, and we couldn't do even that. So they just sort of, where did they go?
They returned to their home planet.
And never to be seen again. Yeah, they're off with Poochie.
I will say, in terms of Doctor Who, I think my funniest note along those lines in terms of like approvals was in the Fugitive Doctor story, there's a character who gets stabbed in the back and falls off a cliff, sort of standard story stuff. And the note that came back was, we don't want there to be any blood because that's, too much. Can the knife be electric instead? So I was like, so instead of just getting stabbed and falling off a cliff, you want them to get stabbed and electrocuted and fall off a cliff, and that's less violent.
But no blood.
Okay.
But it might cauterize
No
the
blood,
wound,
because
preventing bleeding.
Yeah, they wanted the wound to be cauterized, but I was just like, it's one of those instances where it's like, I know you think you're making this better, but to me it feels like it's a little worse actually. But I mean, I was fine with it. It's one of those things. It's just sort of like a funny perspective thing, I guess.
It's the lightsaber logic.
No
blood.
Yeah.
When we were doing Young Justice, the comic, the intent was for it to match the tone of the TV show, which was fairly
heavy,
sophisticated, and not aimed at young kids. It was done in a way that's relatively friendly for kids, but it really wasn't aimed at a kid audience. But DC insisted that since it was based on an animated property, the book be branded an all ages book, and then was therefore subject to the limitations of what they would allow in one of their all ages books. So, Greg wrote a two-parter that was retelling the origin story of Captain Atom, which involves his civilian identity. He's framed for someone's murder, and that revolved around someone finding a body of someone who had been stabbed, and the knife is sticking out of their chest.
Was it electric?
And the plot had been approved. The script was approved. I penciled it. I turned in the pencils, and they said, you can't show a knife sticking out of somebody's chest. Dude. It was the central plot point of the entire story. So we had to figure out how to imply finding a knife sticking out of somebody's chest without showing a knife sticking out of somebody's chest.
Did you just have him standing around going, oh no!
A knife sticking out of that guy's chest.
A knife!
Yeah. We showed them slumped in a chair from the back and had them refer to the knife with dialogue. But it was just annoying. It's like, why are we having to play by these rules when no one working on this wants it to be that kind of a book?
So the chair pushed the knife for... Never mind. Never mind. I mean, I will say that's one of the...
I feel like kids know knives exist.
That's
true. That's one of those weird things, too, about... I'm pretty well known as a kid-friendly, all-ages creator, but I had a background in horror makeup and doing stuff. I was a walker artist on the Walking Dead obstacle course. And so I was here actually in this hotel for Crypticon, and someone was like, what the heck are you doing here? I'm just like, I do scary stuff too. You just don't see that stuff. So I don't know. Labels are a strange thing in this industry.
Well, I'm seeing two questions. The gentleman at the microphone is first.
There we go.
So you each have your own style and way of doing things. In a universe where the three of you were brought together to collaborate on a comic.
Like the comics Voltron.
How would you meld your different styles to work together? How would you go about doing that?
We would do what Jody tells us. Yup.
Well, I mean, I would do what the editor told me. So really, it would sort of come down to what the project was. I mean, I think at the end of the day, especially on licensed stuff, it really all revolves around what the needs of the project are. So that sort of has to be the building block. So it's kind of hard as a hypothetical to say like, oh, we do this because the project might need us all to do that instead.
And each one's, like every single project is so unique in that aspect too, that it definitely, it changes everything every time.
Probably the defining thing of my whole career is that my style has been all over the place depending on the property I've been working on, whether it's something based on photoreal character likenesses like Doctor Who, animated TV properties, superhero stuff, which, early in my career I would have thought would have been to my advantage. Oh, well, yeah, hire Chris Jones. He can do anything. But really, I feel like sometimes it's been a detriment because people don't know what style to associate with my name. Mm-hmm. It's a weird industry. It really is.
Weird and wonderful.
But the point is we should all work together. We should all work together.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm down.
Yeah.
Game on.
All right. I'm sorry. What was your question?
I was just going to jokingly ask if you could show the tip of the knife sticking out of the back of the chair.
Ooh.
Like right now? Sorry, Chris.
Oh, could you share the question because I can't hear?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, she was asking in the anecdote I was telling about not being able to show the person in the chair with the knife stuck in their chest. If we could have shown the tip of the knife coming through the back of the chair. I don't think that would have helped what their issue was with us at all. No,
That'd be a really long knife.
it would be a really nice sword. I don't know. We do have another question at the microphone though. Go ahead, sir.
Hi. I just have a general question. How hard is it for like a mini major like Image or Dark Horse to get like original IP published? Do you need like a named writer or a named artist for them to even look at your original IP?
How hard is it for a publisher to get them to look at an original IP?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
not like a...
I mean, it's one of those strange things as someone who's more on the indie side of things, of getting it in front of the right people is much harder than you think, because that is kind of a set of people that ebbs and flows. So there's always new editors, there's always new people coming to every branch of that. They do usually post up on their social medias and stuff if they do have like open submissions. A lot of the time they won't take what are called unsolicited submissions. So you'd have to have a literary agent of some sort to actually come to them with the property or the IP, which I'll be honest, it's a pain in the butt. I've more recently kind of come to that side of things. And yeah, it's a strange thing, because those open submissions don't come very often anymore, just because when they open them up, it's like, here's 10,000 scripts. It's like everybody's submitting everything at once.
And you don't ever really develop a relationship with a publisher. You develop a relationship with individual people who work for a given publisher. So when there is changeover that happens in their editorial staff, it could sometimes completely destroy whatever connection you've had with a given publisher, or create opportunities if they hire the right person.
True. I've had 7 projects that just got the door slammed in their face after developing script, even some pages, and there was a change up in the lineup, and that was that. So I don't want to say it's cutthroat, but it is very much, I don't know how to put it in a positive way of, it's a pain in the butt, because that stuff can happen.
It's a very hard industry to get anything done in, and you will hear comics creators talk so cynically about working in comics, because really it is a messed up industry. It's really hard, but we obviously love doing what we love, doing what we do so much that in spite of all that, we're still trying to make comics.
It's because we're masochists.
It's one of those things that it's so hard, and the rewards are so less than they should be, that really, if you have the skills to make it in comics and could be happy doing anything else, you should really go do something else. You'd be better off. But if you can't possibly be talked out of doing comics, then you probably have the tenacity to eventually get somewhere.
The other thing I'll say is also look into self-publishing, because that's something that, again, I'm not going to lie, there have been many times where I've kind of sat there and gone, wow, like this is really frustrating. And but when I started up Mindwave years ago, it was something of, I want to tell my own stories, this will be fun. And in the meantime, it's become something of, well, if I don't have contract work, I can work on my own stuff and be producing my own books and whatnot. So it almost serves as a safety net within comics, which is weird to say. But yeah, so look into self-publishing. And if you have questions, too, about self-publishing, feel free to reach out. All my contact information's on the site and such, too.
Another question at the microphone?
Hello.
Hi. So back in the olden days, there were the blue boards, and then you had someone pencil the blue boards, and then you had someone ink the blue boards, and somebody else colored them, and then they went to the publisher, and all of the press stuff and all the press work and everything that was I actually have a background in that too. But how has the digital age changed that process?
For anyone who couldn't hear, the question was about how the the physical step-by-step process of producing comics and getting them turned into the publisher has been changed by technology. And just speaking for myself, I started at a point where I would still get scripts and reference material sent in like a FedEx package by the publisher, and I would have to send off again by probably usually FedEx original pages when they were complete, and then that eventually changed to, they would send you stuff by email, and you would just send a digital file of your page, and now I don't even have the step where I would draw on the paper and scan it to make a digital file out of it anymore. I do the work digitally. So I mean, it has gotten very streamlined and very digital for me.
And I came in, my first pro work, I was a sophomore in college, so I had no idea what I was doing. And I got lucky enough to ink some pages for a DC book, and I was sent pages that I was supposed to scan in, print blue line, ink, and send back. I didn't know that. I was 19 years old, and I got them. They were very grayscaled, very light gray, and I went, okay. And I inked right on the computer paper, scanned them in, cleaned them up a little bit, and then I was to send the digital file in. The funny thing about that was, on their end, they got the digital file. They never saw the originals and my screw up. It wasn't until years later, my editor, the guy who gave me the break for the pages, was flipping through, and I had one of those pages in, and you can tell it looks craggly because the paper has just contracted into this wrinkly mess. And he goes, "What is this?" And I go, "It's one of the pages you gave me." And he goes, "Why is it like that?" And I go, "Because I'm an idiot." And funny enough, he asked if he could have one. He has it framed in his office now. I still hope someday there's a little engraved plaque that just says,
Are
dummy.
we close to time? Do we have time for one more question, or are we done?
3 minutes left. Three?
Okay. Do we? Any last question, or shall we just say our goodbyes? Any last questions in the room? I'm not seeing any hands going up or anything. One.
We got
All
one.
right, make it short and quick.
That's an answer.
Okay, this one's for Jody. What's the temperature like where you're at?
It looks chilly
It's
in the-
actually pretty, I mean, it's LA, but it's pretty chilly. It's been it's been getting down to we had a freeze warning last week, actually. Or no, earlier this week.
We're
Yeah.
at we're at negative 24.
See,
or
yeah,
something.
Yeah, it's not that cold. It's LA cold, which
gee,
means it's upper 50s, low 60s.
I've been explaining LA cold to people here all weekend, Jody, and they're giving me so much grief. So don't rat me out now on how much nicer it is there.
I'll throw it out there. Going to school, so my wife went to school a year before me. She's a year older. She went down to Savannah. She's like, "It's so cold down here. It's 60 degrees." And I'm like, "You're from Minnesota. It's 60 degrees. You should be in shorts and a t-shirt." Until I went down there and realized it's 80% humidity with 60 degrees, which sucks. So I understand the LA cold idea.
And I think that summarizes comics. So thank you all.
Oh,
Thank you all for coming.
One last thing. Let's tell the people where they can find all of us,
yeah.
because we're on the internets. So
Very true.
yeah. So Jody, go for it.
Let's see. Most places I'm Jody Hauser, except on Twitter I'm Jody_Hauser, and Instagram I'm the Jody Hauser because people took my name earlier.
Me too.
But yeah, I have a newsletter. I have a coffee shop where you can buy comics that are signed. So yeah, just find me online.
I'm not as good about posting regularly on my own website as I should be, but if you do go to ChristopherJonesArt.com, that has links to all my social media where I post slightly more often, and you can reach me through that. So that's my contact info.
This chair reclines entirely too far back. You can find me on X at Dave Wheeler. You can find me on Instagram at the Dave Wheeler. You can find me at Patreon, patreon.com/Dave Wonder. You can find me on YouTube, youtube.com/Dave Wonder. I have to say this 3 times a week, so I've gotten pretty good at it. Hopefully you can find us all right back here at Console Room sooner than later. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you Jody for being here. Thank you Chris for being awesome. And have a lovely day. And please stay warm.
Good seeing you, Jody.
See you soon.
Good seeing you.
Bye.
Bye.